Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The A Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host.
Rod here at A Better Way to Farm, where we increase yields and improve profits. Hey, welcome to today's episode. I am really excited. We're going to talk about equipment for getting set up to go in furrow on that planter today. And I'm really, really lucky because this is not my forte. I'm not strong in this, but I have a good friend who is, and he has connections within the industry to help you guys get set up with whatever method you want. If you want a Chevy, we got a Chevy. If you want a Cadillac, we got a Cadillac. And we're going to talk about those systems and why one is better than the other in the circumstance and what kind of money you can expect to spend. But we're going to take the shock value out of going down to the local dealership and being told you need $70,000 or $80,000 to get set up for liquid, because simply that's just not true. So let's dive right in. I'd like to welcome to today's episode my good friend Jeff. Jeff, I know you're busy. Thank you for taking some time today to help me and my guys.
Thank you, Rod. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and help guys understand.
We were talking, Jeff, about how really what our heart is just to help the guys be able to do the right thing the best way that they can, and that's what we're going to do. So I'll open with this, Jeff. When I first got started way back in 1993, which seems like a lifetime ago, the very first guy that I got into buying fertilizer bought a half load of fertilizer. And I went home and I showed my wife the check, and I was so excited that night. And it was our first big sale. And I want to say it was like $7,000. And the next morning by 9 o'clock, he had already called me and said to cancel the order and tear up the check. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, I went to my local John Deere dealer, and to set my planter up, it's going to cost $14,000. It was literally going to cost twice as much to set his planter up as it was for the fertilizer. And in that moment, Jeff, I figured out, I got to figure out how to help these guys. And so I started on a quest. I don't have anything against John Deere or Case IH or whoever it is that you're using. However, there are some very viable options that don't require going to the dealership, right?
That's correct. Yep.
And so let's talk about some of those. Let's start with a 12 row. And I think are you going to break this down on a per row basis, more or less?
I think it's the simplest way to do it because it guys can take their multiplication and figure out their planters.
Okay, so let's start with a low entry system, Jeff. Tell us what it looks like, what kind of pump, what kind of tanks, what kind of delivery system down into the row. Talk that through with us and then talk about what that'd cost per row, roughly.
So the most common planters out there are the simplest. So your John Deere's and your Red. So they're the simplest to get your tanks and your attachments for. But a low cost system is basically very basic. If you have your own tanks, that is going to save you the most money, or you have your tanks on your tractor, because it's a fairly expensive procedure for the tanks and mounts, and they don't mount the same on every planter. But basically is it's an electric pump. You're hosing, you've got some flow indicator gauges that are mounted on the planter, and there's a whisker switch or some type of a switch. When you lift the planter up and down, it turns the pump on and off, because we all know once in a while you get that test strip you're not looking for.
Yeah, the test strip you're not looking for. That was nicely put.
And so basically, if you're looking at a basic system, and just remember, a 12 row to a 16 row, a 24 row, the bigger you go, your cost per row, the expense is spread out across more rows. So there's a little bit of differences. But a basic system without tanks, just on the planter, you're looking at just around $300 a row for a basic system. And there is a monitor in the cab. It really is basically just an indicator that the pump is on. You get minor pressure adjustments, but it's basically speed and pressure. So if you say you're telling me you're going 5 miles an hour and you're going to put on 6 gallons an acre, we put an orifice on each row. And if you go faster, you're going to put less on. If you go slower, you're going to put more on. But it's basically set to run at the speed you plan.
Absolutely. And so that's the entry level. Down at the lower end, on that price per row you just gave, what are we looking at down there? Are you looking at a row tube? You're looking at a rebounder? You're looking at a Keaton seed firmer? What's your deal down there?
So they're all very similar in cost. You're totally tubular, your stainless row tube, which is going to drop it directly on the seed, which is basically just going to be a corn system. It runs about $60 a row. If you're looking at a Keaton seed firmer where you can put your Y knot on the end of it so you can do corn and beans with it, or your Keaton, they're going to run somewhere in that upper 50s to low 70s per row. So they're very similar. They all work well. There's a lot of concern in some of the firmers and things like that. with mud and dragging a seat and stuff like that. We've come a long ways in polymers and plastics. And if you go through mud, God forbid, you're going to have the whole planter plugged, and that firmer is going to be the cleanest thing on your planter.
The firmer is the least of your concerns.
Exactly, yes.
And a rebounder is about the same price as the keep.
It's correct. A little bit cheaper, but yeah, really close. Yep, very close.
And I would encourage people, my experience shows that they actually, they make 2 rebounders. They make a white one and an orange one.
Yes.
The orange one costs $10 or $15 more and lasts about 3 times longer.
Yep, correct.
Spend the money, buy the orange one.
Yep. And attachments on the basic planter, everybody's like, well, it's hard to attach. Most of your generic seat tubes, your rebounders will zip tie right to that tube. And if you have anything other than the standard tube in there, it's a spacer that goes underneath it. So installation of these things, I mean, it's basic. I mean, you basically run your hoses so they don't get pinched, because the first time you cut a hose off, you're going to, I'm going to reroute that because we ain't having that happen again.
You only do that once.
Correct.
That's kind of how that works. So that was with an electric pump.
Correct.
So that's the deal. What do we add? Let's pretend we've got an average John Deere with a pull type John Deere with a frame, and we have to put 2 tanks on it. What kind of money do we add when we add the 2 brackets and the 2 tanks on to that system?
So basically, if you're going to go up to the basic John Deere, you're going to add about another, depending on the frame, whether it's a single tank or not, but the mounts, the tanks, everything, without any freight of getting the tank to you, you're going to add about another $125 a row roughly.
Okay.
So it'll be about $4.25, between $4 and $4.50.
So 12-row planter, we're looking at $5,000, $5,500.
Yep.
Not bad.
Yep. 5 to 6. Yep.
So let's follow down this vein and let's go to the next one, because on my own planter, I call them a mini piston pump. I don't know what the real name for them is. It's a John Blue. It's ground driven.
Yep.
Talk to us. What kind of money do we add when we add that?
So when you're adding your wheel driven pumps, your ground driven pumps, basically, John Blues are the most common. They're very reliable, very durable. The advantage of them is you don't need your whisker switch, which is a $200 difference. But when you pick the planter up, it's off, and you put the planter down, it's on. You speed up, you slow down, your rate adjusts. Your orifice is still doing mainly the work, but if you go faster, that pump's going to pump more. That pump doesn't know if you're feeding 12 rows, 24 rows. It doesn't matter. It pumps so many gallons a minute. But you're going to, between the bracket and the pump, you're going to add roughly about $4,000, $3,500 to $4,000. Just keep in mind, your Deeres, your Cases, and your basic Kinseys and stuff like that are very common for mounting brackets. You start adding interplants, things like that, your tanks change, where your tanks mount change, and sometimes the newer planters are simpler. Older bars, it's harder to get the mount for the wheel-driven pumps because it's less common.
Right.
So,
and fundamentally, anything that's less common makes it an oddity. It makes it more expensive because there's less of it.
And there's more lead time to get the parts you need and the less common.
Yeah, let's talk lead time. Typically, we want to be looking, we want to have this ordered how many weeks before we plan to plant?
A minimum of 6 weeks. And, if you're on, I'm not trying to push guys to a certain type of planter, but if you look at a 1770 John Deere, very common bar, your 1775, 1770s, very common bar. Them tanks are made in abundance and easy to get mounts for. I mean, you call tomorrow, you want to ship it in 2 days, it can go as long as they have it on the floor. But now you start getting into some other plants or mounted planters or older style planters or things like that. It may take 3 to 4 weeks to get the brackets made just to mount the tanks and stuff. So we say 6 weeks minimum, 8. I mean, truthfully, if you know you're going to do this system next year, why wait? You got all summer to start putting stuff on. Get things coming.
Yeah.
The hosing and the plumbing system, that's your least of your worries. That's the simplest thing to do. Just your least headache. The tanks and the mounts, we're going to tell you where to mount it on your planter, so it's best for your frame, best for weight balance, all that stuff. That's all engineered in. And we're going to tell you, you might have to do some engineering on your own because your interplants are going to come up. You might have to raise that tank up a foot so your interplants don't hit it,
So, Jeff, let's switch gears. I have some guys, they prefer to keep the tanks on the tractor. How do you feel about that? What's your take on that?
It's a great idea, especially if you're doing row place, and let's say down the road you want to do 2x2 or you want to do some nitrogen additions and things like that. You're going to need to have them on your tractor and on your bar because the tractor can spread weight better than your planter can. Honestly, you put it in the center of that planter and you're putting 500-gallon tank on there at 10, 11 pounds per gallon. There's 5,000 pounds on there, and the tractor can spread that out easier. The electric pump in the system it pushes extremely well. It doesn't have any suck. So you're going to have your pump closer to them tanks so that it has gravity feeds that pump to feed it. Now, a John Blue, a ground-driven pump, that will suck. You can leave that on the planter. It'll suck out of them tanks on that tractor very easily. And hydraulics and stuff can too. So there's just some little minor things, some more hosing, some things like that.
Absolutely. So we started at $300 a row. We add another $150 for tanks and brackets if we don't come up with those on our own. We could add another $3,000 if we want to go to the ground-driven pump. And honestly, Jeff, you and I don't have a dog in this hunt. We work with people who have the lowest grade system, and it works great. Tremendous results, great results. And we have guys who desire to do better. Let's go kind of a mid-range. Somebody calls and they want to move up a little bit. What's the first thing you would recommend as an improvement or an upgrade?
So a lot of guys, when they go to their dealer, they come out this $50,000 bill or whatever the number is, $80,000 bill out of it, and it's a Cadillac of the system. So in the simplest of systems, it's basically on and off. It's simple, it's pressure. When you want to start going and you maybe want to add row shutoffs, or you want to add a flow meter, or you want to tie it into your system, into the tractor, that's where you'll need to talk to your dealer or your supplier. Whatever monitor you have in the cab is where it's easy to put a flow meter in, and it's just a wiring harvest to connect to that. But when you start adding technology to it, it adds a lot of cost, but maybe you got uneven fields, a lot of terraces, a lot of point rows and stuff like that, so you want to be able to turn things on and off. In an electric pump world, it's going to pump no matter if it's pumping the 6 rows to 12 rows to 24 rows. It's pumping the same amount. So keep them things in mind and do that stuff. But when you bring technology in, that's when you need to talk to whoever monitor you have in the cab. And the plumbing on the planter doesn't change. You just add to it. You keep adding to it. If you want to add conceal for 2x2, if you want to add some nitrogen on the top and the back, I mean, it's just adding to the system.
I guess the hardest thing for me, because I'm not super technologically talented, but I do know you've got to get those things to communicate. That's the biggest thing, is how do I get this new system to communicate with whatever system I have in my tractor? And that can run into some different money there, but there are choices. It's doable. You've set several of those up.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And it really comes down to who you're working with. If you're running a precision monitor, you're running a deer monitor, they're going to want their flow control, rate control box added. They're going to, it's a wiring. You can have a flow meter and your servo valve that's adjusting your flow and your return to your tank, things like that up. But when it's all done, you still need a harness to plug into that. And that's where that monitor is going to come in and do that. The only other thing I would say is a big change is we talk about 16 rows, 12 row standard planters. There's a lot of high speeds out there.
Let's talk about that for a little bit, because we're working on one of those right now.
Yes, we are. Yep.
And it looks like we're going to get the job done.
Yep.
Partly because the guy's been really easy to work with, and he's done a lot of legwork to do some things to speed it up, right?
Correct, yes.
But let's talk about that. What happens when we go into these high-speed planters? What changes, and how much money does that take to get set up that way?
The basic planter system doesn't change. What sometimes changes is if you're using totally tubular, that doesn't change much because that's in your disc in the front. But your firmers, your Keatons, and things like that, your shape, your rebounders, how they mount, because that tube is wider, there's some added equipment to mount that differently on the planters. You may increase your cost another $30 to $50 a row in some mounts. But the biggest thing we run into is if you're running a basic electric and you go to a high-speed planter, you can go to a double-headed pump, and a 12 and a 16, you can handle a lot with electric, but when you get 24 at 8-9 miles an hour, you will need a ground-driven or hydraulic pump. And that's going to be your biggest cost change in that is your pump, because it's a lot of flow.
I got some guys that love hydraulics, and I got some guys that hate hydraulic pumps.
Depends on your tractor, because it takes a lot more power than you ever would think it would take to run that.
And you got to make sure you got the consistency that when it gets hot, that doesn't thin out, right. And then we're not getting a drag in what we're doing.
Your John Blues are so reliable. They've been around for years, and they're simple and they're easy. And most guys that do that, you do some orifice changes for your flow, some things like that. But it's fuel efficient, it's the least amount of power. And you don't have to plumb a return with a ground-driven pump. When you're running hydraulic, that's got to go somewhere. So then you're going to have to plumb a return back into your tanks.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of the John Blue. Like I said, it's what we have on ours at home, and I like that. And so even though as we add to, if we go to the high speed, I mean, we add maybe another $50 or $100 a row, but this isn't a fortune that we're adding in here.
No, we're not even at 1,000 yet.
Right, exactly.
Exactly. A high speed planter, most high speed planters are going to be low to middle sixes for basic ground driven pump and a basic system. Yeah.
Which is, compared to the price of the high-speed planter, that's pretty insignificant.
It is. Yep.
And so, and we know that the guys are loving those, and they're working with them. Top-end Cadillac, Jeff, what are you going to go to? What are you going to?
Well, then you're going to get into some of the precision type equipment, or different things, 360 stuff. So guys get into conceal, so they're doing 2x2, or you're looking at FurrowJet, because you're dropping in the trench and dropping it on each side. So your planning system stays the same in that high speed, or in that $500 to $650 an acre. Now you're just adding things to the unit, in there, and you're splitting things off. So it's a few more lines and some splits and some orifices, but, FurrowJet's running that $300 a row, They work amazing, especially if you need to put more on. You don't want to put it all in that trench. You get in some heavy clays and some mucky type soils. You be aware of your area, talk to your guy you're working with. And then your conceals, they're going to be $800-900 a row to do a 2x2 in that way. Then you start getting into the Cadillacs, but that's where you're going to go to specifically somebody and have that conversation that sells that equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to be crystal clear here. For the lion's share of you, as long as we have the adequate organic matter and CEC, we want this in the trench.
Correct.
We want the rebounder, we want the Keaton, we want the FurrowJet. I'm going to come back to those in a minute, but we want this in the trench. When we get to talking about the 2x2 or the 2x2x2, now we've got the guys who have two systems on.
Correct.
So it'd be 2x2x2.
Correct.
Because we're looking at 2 inches over, two sides of the road, 2 inches deep, and a second system, because now we're probably applying nitrogen, sulfur, and boron to do that. I want to go back to the FurrowJets for just a second and make 2 points, Jeff, that correct me if I'm wrong. I have them. I love them. They're kind of spendy.
Yep.
Okay. They allow me, because I farm in southern Iowa, and we bought a farm with really low soil test levels. And so we're actually putting 16 gallon on, 6 in the trench and 5 in each side. I love that, and I've really been able to increase my P1 levels by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
However, my experience indicates, now you live in Minnesota, where they think rock picking is a spring sport, just like track and baseball.
That's a very true statement.
And my experience is the guys who are farming where there's rocks, they're not so excited about the FurrowJets. Is that something that you found?
Yep. That's very true. It's a very durable piece of equipment, especially at high speed. I've heard stories of guys planting at 9 miles an hour, and all of a sudden out of the corner of their eye, they see that rock sticking up, and it's like a semi stop in front of you on the road. You're skidding the wheels in the field to not hit that planter, because when we hit a rock at 8-9 miles an hour, things tend to fly apart.
And it ain't just the FurrowJet. It's the row unit. It's whatever you hit it with.
Yeah.
And so, but the FurrowJet would just be another thing that would take it on the chin when we did that. So I just want everybody, I love them. I have them. But I think that it's a deal, and we believe one size doesn't fit everybody. And so there's a place for that. Now I want to go back to the second system, Jeff. We believe strongly in banding everything, correct?
Yep.
So we like the idea of putting down some 32, 28, or 28, and then some thiazole and your boron there in a band early on. Specifically, when we add the second system, now we've got to have another pump.
Yes, correct.
And that's probably going to be ground-driven or hydraulic when we go to that one.
More than likely, because your gallons breaker is higher in your 2x2s. You're usually running in that 10 to 20 gallon range in most cases.
And my experience indicates that electric pumps don't really like nitrogen.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's okay, but it's not. They're not expensive, so they're easy to replace. But yeah, you're correct.
But you'd want to have a spare.
Yes, very, very true. Yeah,
it's the nitrogen's hard on them, and so using our product. I mean, I think of my friend Jerry. He planted over 50,000 acres and traded planters, and he took his system. This is how pure our product is. He took the system off of the old planter, put it on the new planter to save money. And he called me. He said, "Hey, Rod, do you think I ought to get a new pump?" And I said, "Well, when did you last replace it?" He said, "Well, I've never replaced it." And I was like, "You've planted 50,000 gallon worth of fertilizer through that thing and never replaced it?" He's like, "Yeah, haven't had a problem." I said, "I think I'd probably go ahead and get a new one at that time." It's a little 12-volt diaphragm pump.
They're very simple, a few $100s.
Yeah. And so I said, "Why don't you keep that old one for a spare and let's get a new one?" But that's kind of the durability. However, when I move over into nitrogen, and now I'm looking at 10 or 20 gallon the acre consistently, and I'm looking at a product that has a tendency to be a little more corrosive, now I'm probably going to go to that ground-driven for that system for sure.
Yes, correct. And one other point too, when you guys move systems around, and with our liquid system compared to others, you look. Most of the lines are rubber except for your 1/4-inch line going down to your firmer. You don't see the cracking and the wear and the drying out of the hoses and things like that. You just don't. And like you do in the other products on the market, your 1030 furrows and stuff like that. The durability of everything's longer. So moving a system to another planter is a great idea to saving that money.
Oh, yeah.
But also back to the 2x2x2 or doing a nitrogen, it is a second system. It is another set of lines, it's another set of flow indicator gauges. More than likely it's a ground-driven pump. And then you already have your tanks and your planters. Now you're adding them on the tractor or trying to figure out how to put another set on your planter and things like that.
Or pulling a cart.
Correct, yes.
Honestly, for turning, I don't love a pull in a cart system. But from a weight standpoint, I really like a cart to spread that. You were talking about spreading out that PSI per square inch. Holy buckets, is that a better plan for me from that standpoint?
Very true.
Again, getting away from the in-furrow for the products that we use, but to help the guys with the 2x2, you talked about the conceal at $800 or $900 a row.
Yep.
We see another option there that some guys like where they put on some tubes out the back and a drag chain.
Yep.
Talk about who makes that system and what kind of money could they expect to do that as an alternative.
There's a few different ones out there. It's very simple. Basically is totally tubular, which is one of your in-furrow ones that you drop into the trench. They make a system that drops out the back, and it's 2 stainless pipes that connect to your behind your closing wheel in the back, and they drop about 2 inches on each side. They drop down. You can drag a chain. Some guys even drag the tips in the dirt a little bit. I don't always recommend that. But basically, it's like putting another in-furrow in. It's about $60 a row. It's not very expensive to put them 2 tubes out the back. Now, that's just the equipment. You still have to plumb it and everything else.
Right.
But it's just like adding another firmer to the planter, essentially.
But the bottom line on that is instead of spending $800 a row, now I'm spending $60 a row on the delivery system itself down low. And I like that. And guys, I want to be crystal clear on this. Our experience would show phosphorus doesn't move.
Correct.
So when someone's trying to convince me to put phosphorus on top of the ground like that, I'm going to walk away. And I'm going to walk away quickly because phosphorus doesn't move down. However, nitrogen, sulfur, and boron, they will readily move. And so when we drop that out the back and band it, there's power in banding. We know that. We take that drag chain so we can get a little dirt over it, cut down on the volatilization, and all of a sudden we've got a pretty usable system there that would be way better than a broadcast.
Yes, correct.
And so we like that. Well, Jeff, I appreciate your time. You got any closing comments for people here as they start looking at, and again, I want to thank you because I know you took the time, deeply appreciative for that, but any closing comments here that you would have for the guys as they're trying to decide how to get set up?
Just ask questions. I mean, doing business locally is an advantage to you for equipment and shipping and stuff like that, but it's never hurts to get a second opinion and figure out in cost because there's a lot of systems out there. There's a lot of automation out there. You can always add to it. Just keep it simple. It's not shock and awe, essentially. You're making a big change in your farm and fertility and what you're doing anyway, so let's not make it complicated with the planter. Let's make the planter simple. Once you get used to it and you see the benefits, we can add to it all day long and improve the system.
And I love that. That's a great point. We've had guys, they've started, they're like, okay, we don't know what we're going to do. And I say this, Jeff, set your planter up. Use the entry-level system.
Yep.
If for some reason you decide this ain't for me, you can sell that system off of there and almost recoup all of it. If you bought it right, if they work through us, there are people actually who will pay you what you got in this because they went to the local dealership and go, oh my goodness, I'll take your system and reuse it. So you've got that option. You're not risking a lot.
I know when guys trade them in, there's no value for a deer system. I've had guys trade it in. They buy the planter because it was going to charge them $50,000 to put it on the planter. They buy the planter because they can buy it for, $10,000, $15,000 on the planter sitting there using. I look at them, I said, I could have put the whole thing on for $7,000.
Yeah, new.
Yeah. And it's not hard to do. That's the biggest hurdle I hear from guys is, well, I'm not very mechanical. I can't do this stuff. Guys, it's zip ties and running lines and figure out where you want to mount some things. And I have an amazing group that I work with that'll tell you exactly where to put it, where to mount your pumps, where to plumb things. When they send you the kit, you ain't running to town every 5 minutes trying to find this elbow, this part. You're going to send things back to them of extra parts that you don't need. They know how to plumb it. They got it all laid out. It's a kit. Unless you drastically route things differently, you're not going to run out of stuff. You can set up a 12 to 16 row planter if you focus on it in a day or two and you're done.
Yeah, 2 days max.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, Jeff, I appreciate your time. Thank you to all of you who are listening. Thanks for tuning in. We love getting to bring you the podcast, and we hope that you find value in what we bring to you. Hopefully, this will help you out just a little bit. You can always reach out to us. You can text Karen at 641-919-5570.
By the way, if you would like to get a custom quote for what it would take to set up your planter for liquid, text the word equipment to 641-919-5570.
We thank you for tuning in today. Hopefully we answered some questions. If you've got more, text Karen, 641-919-5570. And as always, we hope you're having a better day.